And in recent years, she's authored a number of publications with renown and has worked on many Erasmus projects. The role of play in the lives of children and adults is a key focus.
Thank you very much, Eamon, and thank you all for coming back. That was really good. I think speaking after such wonderful speakers this morning has actually made my job a little bit easier, because I don't have to go and explain and go into the depths of things because they've already been set out very clearly for you. So I'm going to look at Aistear. The brief for the conference that I was given was that the Edgeworth story of theory of education was based on the premise that the child's early experiences are formative, and that the associations they form early in life are long-lasting. They also encouraged hands-on learning, as we all heard about this morning, and they included suggestions of experiments that the children could perform and learn in a fun way, which I think is just a fantastic early recognition of the role of this, of modern education, where it's gone in recent years. So I'm going to talk about the principles behind Aistear. I liked this illustration. It's from a scientist into children's learning called Alison Gopnik, and she had it in one of her papers. I have all the papers anything I spoke about is referenced at the back, so if people can access the presentation afterwards, if anybody wants it, just come to me. But the picture on the left-hand side is the children playing, and it could be representative of the time of Maria Edgeworth. Children are playing doctor in obviously privileged children, as we talked about earlier. So I was really glad to hear that there was a lot of work done afterwards for poorer children and less advantaged children. And then this example on the right is of a class from a Montessori school, as our colleague over there will be glad to hear. And that's children going through the Aistear curriculum and having direct hands-on learning with the equipment there. And I really do like the principles of practical education and the way in which they echo what Aistear is doing today. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about what Aistear is, its principles and its themes. Briefly talk about practical education in the early years, then look at play. We've already looked at play, and I looked at it in a slightly different way and look at how play now is forming part of evolutionary psychology, and it's going in a wonderful direction actually, and it might also answer the question somebody asked about the pay differentials between early years, because I'm beginning to see a link between those. And then practical education in Aistear will be kind of imbued through this. And I have a few nice quotes from it as well for you, just to illustrate the points. So what is Aistear? Aistear is the Irish early years curriculum for children aged 0 to 6. So it actually applies also to junior and senior infants in schools. And it came about in 2009. It was based really on the curriculum, but prior to Aistear, there was another framework called Childcentred, which is still there, and that is the overarching quality framework for early years education in Ireland. And Aistear focuses, as I said, on one element of that, the curriculum. And it's presented through 4 themes. This is called the Aistear Wheel, which Aistear is a very visual document. It's really visual, and I think it really tries to recognise that we learn in so many different ways, visually, orally, writing, all those ways. But these themes are all interlinked. But at the heart of them, they see the child as a competent and confident learner. And I think that's what Maria Edgeworth also saw through the observations, and Honora as well, through their observations of children who are quite competent with getting on and learning at their own pace. And we mentioned just before lunch, or one of the earlier speakers spoke, was that practical education had a focus on self-esteem and happiness, which I think was fantastic. And the Aistear element there, the well-being, also focuses on that. So it's a very clear link. all of these themes are largely interdependent with all these well-beings, physical, mental, emotional well-being, essential for the child's development. And you can link that back to something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when he talked about the lower order needs and the higher order needs for growth, and the lower order as deficiency needs, but essential needs. And that in order to progress to the higher order needs, you had to deal with the lower order needs. And practical education focuses on learning and development, and it captures that. And it equates, especially, I think it equates especially with the exploring and thinking theme of Aistear. And such areas can be seen and addressed in the ethos, the policies and procedures of early years services. And they're also addressed, as I said, in Childcentred. So, I'm going to talk about the 12 principles. It's based on 12 principles and divided into 3 groups. So I'm going to go quickly through these and, link it into where practical education reflects that as well. Group 1 is children and their lives in early childhood, and it is about the child's uniqueness, which I think we've clearly seen demonstrated this morning in the earlier speeches. And each child here's their own set of experiences and a unique life story. He or she is an active learner growing up as a member of a family and community with particular traditions and ways of life. And that's very relevant as well, the whole idea of the culture and the context from which the child stems. And that idea of the mother as the initial stimulator for the child is very important, and then broadening that out to other family members. And there's a theorist called Bronfenbrenner who's written about this lovely image of a macro community, and starting with the child of the heart, and then the immediate family, and then spreading out. And it's really worth, that reflects that. But practical education recognises this idea of the child's uniqueness in many examples. It refers frequently to the differences to be seen between different groups of children, and to allow the child to learn from his own experiences. It says that this single circumstance of his being guided in his choice by the opinion of others is dangerous. Instead of attending to his own sensations and learning from his own experience, he acquires the habit of estimating his pleasures by the taste and judgment of those who happen to be near him. And that idea of sort of peer influences and all of those concepts. Equality and diversity, I mean, this is something that we've mentioned already, about the idea of the research was done on privileged children and perhaps didn't acknowledge and had quite a strong language to say about servants and about the Irish, actually, which I was a bit disappointed in, but I think that matured and evolved as time went on. So equality and diversity says that nurturing equality and diversity is important in early childhood. Promoting equality is about creating a fairer society in which everyone can participate equally with the opportunity to fulfil his or her potential. And diversity is about welcoming and valuing individual and group differences, and understanding difference and celebrating it as part of life. So equality and diversity in practical education is one aspect of life that we recognise more in the modern era. And we've already talked about, but going back to the sections on truth and behaviour, where it advised that they should not be left solely with too much with servants, where they would learn untruths and learn to tell lies. And hopefully that quickly changed. And then the last one there is children as citizens. Children are citizens with rights and responsibilities. They have opinions that are worth listening to, and have the right to be involved in making decisions about matters which affect them. In this way, they have a right to experience democracy. And from this experience, they learn that, as well as having rights, they also have a responsibility to respect themselves and others and the environment. And I think that idea of respect, I was really glad to hear how much that was imbued into practical education, that respect for children. And it was ahead of its time, really, in writing about that. And I also will remember when I was a child being told I'd be seen and not heard. And that was a strong influence on childhood, certainly in the 50s and 60s in Ireland. But the practical learning advocated in it would facilitate children's development as useful citizens, able to contribute to society. And it's lovely to see the modern changes that we have, where we have the idea of the children's Dáil, for example, and the different children's consultation that goes on. And there's an author called, there's a professor in Queen's University in Belfast, Laura Lundy, and she has a wonderful model for children's participation, which is being accepted now by the LCCA and by the schools and by the HSE in Ireland. And there was a wonderful example of that yesterday. A colleague of mine was preparing with children a model garden for blooms. Mariah Edgeworth would have loved it. So they're going to have watch out for it when you see Bloom on the TV or if you go to visit it. They're doing a garden and they're using Laura Lundy's model of children's participation to help develop based on the children's opinions. So I think all of that is coming full circle, and certainly you would have foreseen that 225 years ago. So I think it's terrific that it's actually coming to fruition now. So group 2 of the 3 groups, how children learn and develop. So first of all, there's relationships, parents, family and community. Oh, sorry, I've gone too far. Children's connections with others, group 2. It's confusing. I've got 2 sets of pictures up here on the computer. So there's relationships, parents, family and community, and the adult's role. And relationships, it says that children have a fundamental need to be with other people. They're social beings. We know that. We all are. They learn and develop through loving and nurturing relationships with adults and other children, and the quality of these interactions impacts on their learning and development. I loved the little story in Practical Education of the role of the father supporting the children's curiosity through dissecting the cuckoo clock belonging to one of the children and providing suitable opportunities to do practical things suited to the child's capacity, such as, providing tools for building chemical and mechanical experiments. So in terms of parents, family and community, parents are the most important people in children's lives. The care and education that children receive from their parents and family, especially during their early months and years, greatly influence their overall development. And to be honest, in recent years, it's coming full circle again that the parents are seen in our constitution as the primary educators of their child. But also that whole idea of consultation involving communities together is coming more to the fore as well. And the extended family and community also have important roles to play, as I mentioned earlier. And there was one lovely quote, I haven't got the quote of it, but there was one lovely example in the book of a visitor coming and asking the wrong questions of the children, and just kind of disturbing their train of thought and how that was so inappropriate. So I thought that was actually nice to have that recognised. Early learning in terms of the adult's role takes place through a reciprocal relationship between the adult and child. Sometimes the adult leads the learning and sometimes the child leads. The adult enhances learning through a respectful understanding of the child's uniqueness. He or she alters the type and amount of support as the child grows in confidence and competence and achieves new things. So practical education is keenly aware of the adult's role and how negative attitudes which show disrespect are wrong. So you have comments such as, why don't you get your task instead of playing with your playthings from morning till night? You're growing too old now to do nothing but play. You cannot be a child all your life, so go and fetch your book and learn your task. Which, again, is just making that leap and differentiating between the learning as play and the idea of formal learning. And in the United States in particular, the academic influence is pushing down, and they're trying to have children in early years doing academics, which is totally inappropriate. I mean, for example, getting a child to write too early is so wrong because the child's hand bones have actually not fused properly and they've not formed properly. So teaching them to write too early is really inappropriate. So, up to sort of the age of 6, 7, that really, all those things should come through play, absolutely come through play. And that's why Aistear goes up to the age of 6. So, I don't know why the word play changed its meaning, but that captures some of it. It really does. And why the child had being so often desired to go and play, should now be given out to for going and playing. I wanted to read a little bit. There was a couple of so many. I could have talked for 3 hours about this, but there's this lovely thing about the child's feelings are the last things to be considered on this occasion. The immediate business is to teach him to read. A new era in his life now commences. The age of learning begins, and begins in sorrow. Which I thought was very right, very true, really true. The consequences of a bad beginning are proverbially ominous, but no omens can avert his fate. No omens can deter his tutor from the undertaking. The anointed moment has come. The boy is 4 years old, and he must learn to read. I mean, there's so much work. I could have quoted so many people on this one, but just definitely practical education has it much more right than that was. And I have a beautiful example there of clay. I'll read it to you now. A little boy of 9 years old was standing without any book in his hand and seemingly idle. He was amusing himself with looking at what he called a rainbow on the floor. He begged his sister to look at it. Then he said he wondered what could make it, how it came there. The sun shone bright through the window. The boy moved several things in the room so as to place them sometimes between the light and the colours which he saw upon the floor, and sometimes in a corner of the room where the sun did not shine. As he moved the things, he said, "This is not it." This was a child creating the scientific experiment. He moved it around again and said, "Nor this, and this hasn't anything to do with it." At last he found that when he moved a tumbler of water out of the place where it stood, his rainbow vanished. Some violets were in the tumbler. He thought they might be the cause of the colours which he saw on the floor, or as he expressed it, perhaps these may be the thing. He took the violets out of the water. The colours remained upon the floor. He then thought it might be the water. He emptied the glass. The colours remained, but they were fainter. He immediately observed that it was the water and the glass together that made the rainbow. But, said he, there was no glass in the sky, yet there was a rainbow. So I think the water alone would do if we could but hold it together without the glass. So I just think that's wonderful. I know how I can manage. He poured the water slowly out of the basin into a basin which he placed where the sun shone. And he saw the flowers on the floor, colours on the floor, twinkling behind the water as it fell. This delighted him much, but he asked why it would not do when the sun did not shine. The sun went behind a cloud. It all disappeared. So then he realised what was causing his rainbows. I just think that's a beautiful example of allowing a child time and space to experiment, to explore. And I know there was another piece which was beautiful about Richard Lovell, watching the children and doing something very, very special. He let them create flow. He let them get to a state of flow. And flow is one of those wonderful things when you're concentrating so hard that you lose all sense of what's around you and you can just keep going forever. And it's a wonderful thing, and it helps children in learning, creating a learning disposition. I think there was a little bit of contradictory stuff in practical education, where she's talking about the later ideas about gaining children's attention, about the idea of the volatile genius. Whereas if the connection had been made with observing when the children were in a state of flow, you'd realise that what got the children's attention and give them time to explore it. Okay, how am I in? Okay on time? Yeah, right. So there we have group 2, and then we look at group 3, and this really to me is where practical education comes to the fore, that whole sense of how children learn and develop. And children learn many different things at the same time. What they learn is connected to where, how, and with whom they learn. An infant should never be interrupted in its operations, she says. While it wishes to use its hands, we should not be impatient to make it walk. Or when it is pacing, with all its attention to centre of gravity that is exerted by a rope dancer, we shouldn't arrest its progress and insist upon it pronouncing the scanty vocabulary which we have compelled it to learn. So leave children be. They will come on and develop. And that idea of hastening slowly can come true. When they're busily trying experiments upon objects within their reach, we should not, by way of saving them trouble, break the course of their ideas and totally prevent them from acquiring knowledge by their own experience. And I think that idea of Richard Lovell sitting back and letting the children work away and creating that environment where they have water, they have opportunities for experiments is a great model for our early years educators today and for our teachers. Certainly children will actually come to academics eventually, but when they have actually developed and grown as much as possible. So the second one there is active learning, and we talked about that a lot, so I won't dwell on it, but it's just about children using their senses to explore and work with the objects and materials around them. And through those experiences, I think this is really important, they develop the dispositions. We talked about intrinsic motivation. Brian talked about intrinsic motivation. And I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge. And that's where you get, say, a punishment would make you behave differently, and that's extrinsic. But the idea of intrinsic, where you want to do it for its own sake and because it's something you value and benefit from, is really important. And it's what will stay with you through your life, especially with our portfolio careers these days, where we have to learn and relearn a lot of different things. And values that will help them to grow as confident and competent learners. So Mariah too says that several toys which are made at present are calculated to give pleasure merely by exciting surprise. We all see that at Christmas. What do the children play with? Boxes. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely true. And that idea earlier of the rainbow and all of that really relates to the idea of what's very prominent now in early years is the idea of loose part sessions. And I've done that. I was working in a refugee camp. One of the things I did was collected over a period of time a lot of different loose parts, like boxes, tapes, things to tie them together, containers. And I cleared absolutely everything out and put out these items, and the children had a ball. Some of the children built the most amazing apartment constructors. One little boy just sat there who'd had a really traumatic experiences, fleeing from Syria, and he sat there and he built a 3-story apartment block, and he got the little sort of fake IKEA donations we'd had for little vegetables, and he put those, that was the vegetable garden, and he had this going up and down, and he was just so proud of this. And I said, do you want to bring it home? No, he was done. The process was the thing. And that's the idea. I think a lot of us are expecting outcomes from children and finished products. It's the process a lot of the time. That's very important. So that idea of play and hands-on experiences and relevant and meaningful experiences, they make learning more enjoyable and positive for children. And, I'm involved in the Erasmus project at the moment, which is looking at pedagogical documentation. And it's really interesting to see it in its infancy and developing on how we can document children. It's a challenge for early years educators, and it's a challenge for teachers as well. How do you capture all of those things? So we're developing, hopefully, a digital tool to help that, and there will be a book. But that's that really capturing that helps people grow and develop in their learning, in their teaching practice. And this an assessment is about building a picture of children's individual strengths, weaknesses, etc., and using this to help plan and scaffold their learning for the future. And I know Vygotsky said scaffolding learning is by peers as well. It's so children learn from each other. And I know some of the Childcentred standards advocate for mixed groups of children, mixed age groups, as being quite beneficial for children. And it's how much they learn from everything when it's judiciously chosen. The idea of the communication and language, and that whole idea of the ability to communicate, and that idea of listening to children, allowing them time to speak, allowing them time to get the words out and not jumping in. And that's really important. And it's shaped by two main things: children's own ability, but the environment around them as well. I have to say, I don't like forward-facing buggies. They're very bad for children's speech and language development, also for their emotional development, but speech and language. And it's really much better if children are in rear-facing buggies. I mean, the old days of just when a child was born, when I was 6 months old, went into the big giant pram. And it was always able to, at a level with its mother or father or whoever was pushing it, to talk to them. And it was wonderful. And nowadays we have these yokes. So the emphasis, active learning there, the emphasis on active learning through the provision of suitable toys and materials is strongly seen. And to me, it's one of the strongest elements of practical education. And I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about a couple of current theorists and talk about play and how it should be tailored to the individual child education, and it should be adapted to the needs, strengths and weaknesses of each child. And I know children's rights weren't a thing at the time. We had Thomas Paine and the rights of man, but we didn't have children's rights as such. We didn't have women's rights either, so we were on a par with that. But nowadays we have the children's rights, the UNCRC from 1999, and we have a much more child-centred approach and much more really strong recognition that children are great contributors and can be consulted at their level in their, to address a lot of what they need. And the links to the child, this is a link to the child-centred approach taken by Aistear. And practical education believed that this individualised approach would help children reach their full potential. And I just want to say about play, we talked about that transition from play to learning and see it as a different thing. And it's slowly disappearing. It's slowly disappearing. And I love her quote, "He breaks them, not from the love of mischief, but from the hatred of idleness." These are the toys. Either he wishes to see what his playthings are made of and how they are made, or whether he can put them back together again if the parts be once separated. And I really strongly believe that play has become confused with entertainment, that it's not seen as the valuable scientific experiments that children do and need to do. It is their work, as Prebble has said, it really is. It is the work of children, and it can be seen as the creative element of adult work, and it inspires scientific discovery. I mean, true scientists will be out there testing and exploring, doing what children do. And I think it's really important. I also, just a slight aside, I think that idea of play as entertainment contributes to the downgrading of the professional status of early years educators. They're seen as just caring, just minding the children, and play is not important. So I think that is something that I will build on in the future in some of the advocacy work that I do. So in Aistear, we have Karen, and Aistear was built on a number of research papers, which are really worth reading if you want to explore it further. And it talks about play being voluntary, spontaneous and meaningful. When playing, children can experience risk within safe and secure boundaries, and they can often concentrate for long periods of time as well. One of the other research papers was written by a colleague of mine, Geraldine French, and she wrote, basically, she stems from a high scope background. High scope is a particular way of working with children that is very hands-on and very much consults with children a lot of the time. And then just to go to, during the 80s and 90s, the researchers discovered that young children have got very abstract, structured, but coherent causal representations of the world around them, representations that are similar to scientific theories. They use these to make wide-ranging new predictions. These representations appear to be in place even in infancy, but it is particularly clear that preschoolers have intuitive theories of the physical, biological, psychological and social world. And that's from Alison Gopnik, whose paper I've given a link to at the end. So, there she is. There's the representations. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about Peter Gray and Bob Hughes. Bob Hughes died recently, sadly, but I've seen both. I follow Peter Gray. He's very good. He's an evolutionary psychologist, and he writes a lot about play and about to get away from the rigid factory style teaching methods in schools, which is moving away from it here in Ireland, certainly in the primary system, but it's still prevalent in a lot of places, in a lot of other countries. And it's, he really talks, he talks about what is play and the functions of play, and he's really worth following to read his writing. He writes a lot in psychology today. And I'm just, the last one here I'm going to talk about is Bob Hughes. I got to meet Bob Hughes a few years ago when I was chairing a conference for LCN, and Bob Hughes looked at evolutionary play as well, evolutionary psychology, and how play is absolutely essential part of childhood. Do you know what was one of the earliest evidences of play found? Anybody know this one?
Sketching.
Sorry?
Jumping over the rope.
Jumping over a rope?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's actual physical evidence of going back to the caveman era of an adult footprints that were in sand, and inside the adult footprints were a child's footprints, and the child was jumping through into the adult's footprints, and that became solidified. It became a fossil, and it's somewhere in a museum somewhere in the world. But that idea of play, and Bob Hughes did a wonderful job of breaking down the play types and going back and discovering how and why these originated. And I'm only going to give you one example because I could be here all day with it. But he has recapitulative play, which you can see up at the top middle. And that is play that allows the child to explore ancestry, history, rituals, stories, rhymes, fire, and darkness. It enables children to access the play of earlier human evolutionary stages. And I just think that's fascinating, that idea that all these things, because now they're looking at things like intergenerational trauma, a trauma that's passed down from generation to generation, and how it needs to be addressed. And play is a way of resolving an awful lot of these issues. And social play is a wonderful opportunity for play during which the rules and criteria for social engagement and interaction can be revealed, explored, and amended. So he's well worth reading. He writes in such an accessible way, and he's a sad loss to the whole area of play and play work. So I'll finish up by saying we have examined what is Aistear, its principles and themes, the many observations in practical education, early years education. We had a brief look at the scientific aspects of play in Aistear and practical education and Aistear. And my last thing is just to say that she has a wonderful piece in the early parts of practical education where she has a whole half a page devoted to this. I fell in love with her at that stage because I love blowing bubbles and I love what they do. And when I had no language and way to communicate with the refugee children, when they spoke Farsi and Arabic and Greek and other things, and I was there with my little bit of Irish and English, every day I'd finish up the session by taking out the bubbles and saying, okay, out for bubbles. And they knew that was the end of the session, and it was great. And I'm just so thrilled that she mentioned it and referenced it. So I'll finish up on that, and I'll just say, Gaurav Mahagut, thank you, and special thanks to the Edgeworths' contribution to the education of Irish children. Thank you very much.
I spent a career in teaching myself, but one thing that I observed through my time was just children that came from homes where there was a stimulating environment in the early stages and how they sailed through school effortlessly.
Yeah.
And I have a hunch that maybe we're not even focusing enough on that, the very early years before they go to play school. And it's no coincidence that, let's say, in Finland, their education system is very much affirmed, and we're told that it's very good. But one of the things that they have going there is that there's quite extensive maternity and paternity leave to give parents that chance at the very early stage to be a big influence on the children. And I think that would be a very good investment for the government.
I think you've hit on something very true. And there are two longitudinal studies going on. There's growing up in Ireland, and in England there's the Eckers study that's been going on for years. And one of the key findings the key finding is that reading with children and having that environment where there's books with children in the early years is hugely important, and it is the greatest indicator of academic success later on.
Yeah, just a point on that, I was listening to an interview with some educationalists and talking about reading, and somebody was asking the question, well, how early would we read to the child? Would we, let's say, when they would be a week old or that? And said even before that, she said, would be very important. So, there you go.
Absolutely. One more, the editing.
Even to look at the wildlife programs on TV, you know, like people like David Attenborough, how the animals, the baby animals, are instinctively and naturally expressing their internal, their emotions through play, and they don't need to be taught it. It's just, you know, and they're being creative and they're acting naturally, and it's very spontaneous. So it's a great model, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, absolutely. And my dad, we had a little old black and white years and years ago, and my dad started me on, anybody, we were revealing my age, Hans and Lottie Haas.
Yes.
They did one of the early exploration programs, and it was quite remarkable. And then, of course, later on we had David Attenborough and others, and Johnny Morris and the language of animals, you know, all of those things, and for children to share those. There's terrific benefits to watching some of these things for children. You know, it isn't all negative to be watching screens. There are good things.
And of course, that's the direct link with Darwin, of course.
With who?
The Darwin.
Oh yes, yeah. And Gert van Gelderen, the Irish, did years ago. Yeah, and Wild Islands is on the moment now. It's fantastic as well. Sorry, this gentleman here. Yes, they in the early '60s, I think. Were they which? They were underwater, but they were fantastic nature programs. They were terrific.
The famous
Yeah.
Annie Pass Sims were developing this with Jack Restore,
The scuba apparatus. Yeah. But they did nature programs. They were terrific. A lot around the water. Yeah, I really loved them. Is there one more there? Oh, this lady. Yeah.
No, as a primary teacher, I would always have believed that nature was the real teacher.
Yeah.
And the closest the primary school curriculum got to, and I think I've thought through about 3 of them, but not getting to the real kernel of the whole thing, like the Edgeworths had tried, or did, was outdoor. The Aistear got there.
Yes,
I was so excited.
Yeah.
This is it. Before I go, I'll have the Aistear, and I leave happily knowing that Aistear has brought the children outdoors and holistic learning and everything. Every speaker mentioned that today that is necessary. But what it just didn't crack it either, because I had to take the outdoors in, say the clay or the bricks. It's all shelves in the classroom. But thanks be to God, I came across Forest School.
Yes.
So trained as a Forest School teacher. I think Brian might confirm that it's part of the Spreadle module now.
It's a terrific. I've been visited at forest schools. Yeah, my grandchildren went to one.
Wonderful. Also, the QQI level 6 forest school training is starting in Ireland.
Which is well worth.
In St. Bridget's Garden. Bridget's Garden in Galway.
Yeah.
And
it's a lovely place.
Just if anyone is curious, Irish Forest School Association.ie, and also more curious, you can attend the AGM in Cork, 10th and 11th of June this year, for members and non-members.
That's interesting.
And the last thing I'll say about the National Childcare Network based in Monaghan, and you've come from Cavan today.
Oh yeah, okay, you know as well.
Yes, well, Michelle
Hart.
I'm not sure, but no, it's not. McGee, or that's Playboard.
That's Playboard, yeah. Michelle Hart is NCN. Yeah.
Yes,
she's the new CEO.
Michelle, yeah. So they have asked the Cutil contingent, and there's at least 3 forest school leaders with our own forest schools in Cutil area and Cutil Monaghan, I should say, and they want us to do a full day's workshop for their July conference or whatever.
Brilliant. I think forest schools are great. I've had the opportunity to visit the one my grandchildren went to, and it was a fantastic experience, very well managed, well delivered, and the caretaker from the school would come up at a certain point with a big little truck with the hot chocolate for them. So it was lovely. So created the pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.